Hello, welcome everyone to another WCS panel. My name is Lisa Ann Pinkerton. I'm the founder and chairwoman of Women in Clean Tech and Sustainability and the founder and CEO of Technica Communications, and I will be your host and moderator for today. Our agenda is pretty straightforward. We're in the arrival and housekeeping section. We're going to have our panel, some moderator Q&A, and then we're going to have some questions from you, our audience, and of course, wrapping up in about 1 hour. If you're unfamiliar with Women in Clean Tech and Sustainability, here is our shameless plug slide. We are focused on building an influential network of professionals, furthering roles for women in the green economy, and that's also supporting men in this space as well. We have monthly events, mostly virtual these days, but we're going back to in person in a small way this year and more in a larger way next year. We also have an annual mentorship program for people in furthering their professional careers in what I call like W-2 careers. And also we've got our entrepreneurship program, which we are just getting started. So if you have ideas for that, please let us know, or want to be involved, let us know that as well. And that's going to have a large mentorship component too for our W9 people. And also we've got our TED Style conference that we have every year, which is hosted by Google. And we're also going to possibly have a big summit this year in November, so stay tuned for that. Speaking of upcoming events, the LA chapter has a transit panel with LA Metro coming up in a couple of, about a week. And also we're going to have an ESG reporting panel in July, so save that date. And also I think we've got some sustainable fashion events coming up, so stay tuned for some cool stuff. We've all been on Zoom for a long time now, and so I don't think I need to sort of go through all the Zoom etiquette, but do want to point out that we love to see your lovely faces. So please share your video if you feel comfortable, and also please share your full name in your Zoom title there, and the LinkedIn profile link for you, because here we're not going to have any breakout sessions. It's a pure informational panel, but there are a lot of you on this call, and we want to give you the opportunity to network. And the way you do that is put your LinkedIn profile URL in there, tell people who you are and what you do, and then link in with each other and have some chats in LinkedIn, perhaps do a virtual call and do your networking, because networking is as effective as the effort that you put into it. That's my personal tip for the day. All right. In terms of virtual membership, thank you to all of our virtual members. We have had this virtual offering for only not even a year, and it has just grown by leaps and bounds. We have people in 23 states, 7 countries. It's really, really an honor to watch the organization growing. We're really excited to have you all part of our community. So here are some of your benefits. You get into the events for free. You get early access to new job postings, those kinds of things. So take a picture of the QR code if you're interested in your virtual membership. And if you are not a virtual member and you sign up today, we will reimburse you for the price of this event. Meanwhile, we have a members portal that we have been integrating. And if you are not aware, that's okay, because we haven't been making a big deal about it. But we do encourage you, if you are members, to go there, set up your profile and start networking with each other there. There's a lot of ladies up there, and they are talking to each other, and they are, gaining a lot of value from this membership portal. And also, if you're not a member and you sign up through this portal for our events, you won't have to pay those fees that you normally do. So it benefits everyone. So please check it out. Okay, like I said, I'm your moderator, president and founder and CEO of Technica Communications, and founder and chairwoman of Women in Clean Tech and Sustainability. I founded WCS 10 years ago when I really wanted a type of community like this and didn't find one. So I was like, I'll just build it myself. We also have a really fantastic panel today. Anne Claire Howard, who's CEO of Responsible Steel, Christy Gamble, Senior Director of Sustainability at Carbon Cure Technologies, Dinah McLeod, CEO of Global Cement and Concrete Association, and also Janice Tran, CEO of Canaan Energy. So before we get our panel started, I also want to thank today's volunteers. This event would not be possible without all of their hard work, and they've put in a lot of hours this. So we get a chance to appreciate them. And we have our event organizer, Nissa Sangamino, our event committee lead, Caroline Trowbridge, our marketing event lead, Oakley Jennings Fast, our Zoom producers, Alyssa Harrell and Gina Dinatalier. These ladies have brought us all together here today. So I want to take a moment to thank you all for your hard work, and take a picture of that QR code if you are interested in being a volunteer, because WCS is very nearly an all volunteer organization, and we all put in our time because we're passionate about growing the organization in this space, and also because usually there's something personal we're getting out of it, right? Maybe it's altruistic, we want to give back to our community, or maybe some of us are looking to further our careers, find a new job, those kinds of things, and we'd like to know what it is that you are interested in, because we want to help you gain achieve the goals that you're looking to achieve while also helping us. So it can be a win-win. So email volunteer@womencleantechsustainability.org. Talk to Leah, who is our volunteer coordinator, and she will help get you into the organization, and so that you can help us grow. All right, so that is our sort of, the logistics. And so now it's time to get into the panel. So our first speaker today is, let me find my script. Hold on one moment. Okay, so I'm really excited about this event because the built environment is so critical to the health of our planet. We need it, right? And what we but the challenges has always been the carbon, the embedded carbon that is in these products. So we're talking construction, mining, waste, cement, steel, concrete, and more. And these are responsible for nearly 40% of global greenhouse gas emissions. So we really need to get the carbon out of these materials without sacrificing the need for them, because the built environment's only going to grow in the future. So we have a very impressive lineup of speakers that we're going to talk to today. So it's going to be somewhat of a talk show format. I'll introduce a speaker, ask her a few questions, and we'll go to the next speaker, and then we'll bring all the speakers back for more group questions. So our first speaker is Dinah McLeod. She's the Chief Executive Officer at Global Concrete and Cement Association, also known as the GCCA. And she is a social environmental sustainability professional with over 20 years of experience in both the public and private sectors. Welcome, Dinah. So Dinah, you are leading the GCCA's efforts to drive sustainable practices across the industry and to position cement and concrete as key contributors to solving today's global challenges. So my first question to you is, what are some of the key low carbon cement and concrete products that are gaining traction right now?
So I guess I would say is there's lots of stuff out there. Everyone's really interested in producing more lower carbon products. But what I'd like to say is that we need to generate more global demand for low carbon products. What I would say here is we need governments, which around the world, I think it's in the US is even higher, but around the world, it's as much as 40% of the market for cement and concrete is governments. We need those to get their procurement criteria in such a way that they're saying to us, we want low carbon products. And we also want governments to help it become more easy for other customers to understand what you mean by low carbon products. And how you understand that is you get these things called environmental product declarations on your products. It's like, I've heard it described as nutrition facts for materials. So if you get that EPD onto all of our products, it allows customers to make more informed choices. So we need to build more demand. We've got some products out there, but we need more of them, of course.
Absolutely. And just for a baseline for everyone, when you're decarbonizing cement and concrete, what are some of those techniques? I'm sure it's different for each type of company startup, but if you could give us an example.
Yeah, sure. Well, first of all, we hold up our hand and say, when we produce our product, we are responsible for about 8% of the world's emissions. And we've done pretty well in getting our emissions down over the last 30 years. We've reduced it by about 19%, but we recognize that there is a climate emergency and that we have to do better. And so what we're gunning for at the GCCA is carbon neutral concrete by 2050, which is in line with the Paris Agreement. So that's what we're looking to do. We made an announcement to that effect last year, and right now we're going through a roadmap of all the different levers, maybe 100 different levers that you can pull in order to produce carbon neutral concrete. I guess some of the things that we are looking toward, they're available right now, and our members are doing it. There are things like using alternative fuels that to make it, they're also making, reducing the amount of clinker that's in cement, because clinker is where that real emissions problem is. So if you reduce the ratio of clinker into cement using other materials and then reduce the cement that goes into concrete, that's another way. We also, as an industry, we can use otherwise unrecyclable municipal waste as part of our putting it into a kiln. So we can avoid other industries putting their stuff into landfill. So there's all sorts of things. And then I think we're going to hear some more about the technology that we're also looking for, carbon CCUS and the rest of it. But there's lots of stuff that's available right now that can help us.
That's fantastic. That's great to hear. And for people on the call who don't know what clinker is, could you just let them know, like just a quick little description?
So clinker is this stuff, and there is it's limestone is quarried from a quarry. It gets mixed with a little bit of other stuff, and it gets heated up to really, really, really high temperatures. And so there are two things that cause, and that makes clinker. And clinker goes in and is the cement. But there's two things that we have. We have a problem because limestone degrades into CO2, and also we heat a lot. So those are the things that we want to address.
Okay, fantastic. Well, thank you very much, Dinah, for being on this panel. We'll get back to you when we broaden out the conversation. Our next speaker I'd like to introduce is Christy Gamble, and she's the Senior Director of Sustainability at Carbon Cure Technologies. And she's been with the company for 8 years, moving up from Manager of Strategic Partnerships. So congratulations, Christy, on your career path here. Welcome to the event, and thank you for being on our panel.
Thank you, Lisa, and I'm really excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Of course. I want to start out with another baseline question because I want to make sure everybody understands what we're talking about here. Because I'm sorry, I haven't spent a lot of time in my life, understanding the ins and outs of things like steel and concrete. So I'm sure other people are in the same boat. So when we're talking about what you guys do at Carbon Cure, explain to us sort of what your product and mission is.
Sure. Well, Carbon Cure is on a mission to work with the cement and concrete industry on this global mission to decarbonize. So just to put a little bit of perspective here, concrete is the most abundant man-made material in the world. So it's actually the second most abundant material, period, after water. And so because we use concrete everywhere, it has a significant carbon impact. And that carbon impact, as Dunn explained, comes from cement, which is the glue that holds concrete together. In order to make cement, it's a fairly intensive, carbon-intensive process. And that process results in about 7 to 8% of the world's CO2 emissions. And so that is the challenge that the industry is collectively working towards. And as Dinah mentioned, there's about 150 different levers and strategies to reduce that impact. And it's going to take all of those different strategies to be able to ultimately make that impact go from 7 to 8% to 0% to get to that carbon neutral goal. Carbon Cure is one of those. We are a leader in the emerging industry of carbon capture and utilization, which is basically this concept of capturing CO2 from the emitters of different industry, and then using that CO2 in a beneficial way to make products. So in the case of Carbon Cure technology, we beneficially reuse carbon dioxide in the production of concrete. So we're further downstream from cement. We're introducing CO2 into concrete where it becomes permanently converted into a mineral and permanently captured in concrete. And the result of it is we're able to produce concrete that has a reduced carbon footprint.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. And so give us an example of an application for one of your products, maybe a case study of where this has been used and how successful it was.
Absolutely. Well, we work directly with concrete producers. We install our technology at concrete plants that are producing concrete every day. Right now, we have about 350 concrete plants across primarily Canada and the United States, some parts of the globe as well. We are expanding internationally. And to date, our technology is being used on over 11 million cubic yards, or for non-Americans, about over 8 million cubic meters of concrete. So this is a lot of concrete that's going to all sorts of different kinds of applications, ranging from driveways in rural Indiana to one of the marquee projects that we have under construction right now is Amazon's headquarters in Arlington, Virginia. All of the concrete on this building so far and likely in the future is going to be used with CarbonCure. And it's a great example of mission alignment. Amazon is one example of a company that has climate goals, and this is one way that we can help them achieve those climate goals.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. I'm excited to ask you more questions. We will get back to you in a moment after I've introduced the other speakers. So thank you for being on this panel.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Our next guest is the CEO of Responsible Steel, and her name is Anne-Claire Howard, and she's coming to us from the UK. So thank you, Anne-Claire, for staying. Well, it's not so late over there, but getting into the downtime, and I appreciate you being here with us.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm really excited.
You also have a background from being the executive director of Better Coal, so I find that also interesting that you've got these two different sets of experiences that you're bringing to bear here. I appreciate that. I wanted to ask you about the steel industry and sort of what practices is Responsible Steel encouraging, and what are you seeing in the space right now? Give us a baseline.
Yeah, well, I'll set the scene a little bit first, and much like the previous panelists, it's important to explain that steel is between 7 and 9% of greenhouse gas emissions. So if you're talking about climate change, like concrete and cement, it's a massive contributor to the problem that we face. It's also a complex value chain. A lot of mined materials, minerals. It's 10% of coal production currently goes into steelmaking. 93% of all minerals produced is actually steel. It uses, 85% of manganese goes into making steel. So it's not just the steel making process itself, which is challenging in terms of sustainability. It's the whole value chain of steel making. So that's kind of the premise. So Responsible Steel was set up a couple of years ago and is a multi-stakeholder nonprofit. So we have equal voice for business members and civil society members. And we have set a global certification standard for what we call responsible steel. And that responsible steel covers 12 broad ESG principles, one of which is greenhouse gas emissions, but there are 11 other principles which cover, water stewardship, biodiversity, human rights, labor rights. So we're really trying to be as holistic as we can when we talk about sustainability. One of the biggest challenges we're seeing right now is a lot of oxygen, and excuse the pun, is being taken over by the conversation on greenhouse gas emissions, and the rest of ESG matters tends to be pushed to the side. And I think that for steelmaking and a lot of industries that have a high mining component, we can't really afford to do that. But Responsible Steel's mission is really about maximizing steel's contribution to sustainable society. And through that, obviously, decarbonization is a main objective. I won't go into all the technology that's available, not available, but there's a couple of points that the previous speakers made, which I'd like to build on a bit. The first one is there is a lot of momentum, but it's about creating demand for these low carbon products. And for steelmakers, there's a lot of really interesting technology on the market of potential really low carbon steelmaking facilities, but we need big boosts in investment. But even those with the most ambitious scenarios, that would only represent 1% of steel production by 2030. And we can't afford to wait, a decade for the industry to decarbonize. So a lot of what we're doing through our standards and through our interaction with steelmakers and their buyers and their suppliers in the mining space is around how the use of our certification and our standards can support the transition of the steel sector. because it's not just about the technology that's going to be the silver bullet and suddenly decarbonize, steelmaking. It's about how do we encourage policymakers, buyers, the finance sector to invest in decarbonizing some of these existing assets today. Because the beauty of steel, and I'll end on that, and I'm relatively new to steel, but I never actually thought about it, is steel is everywhere. Much like cement, it's hard to avoid, it's in your everyday life, it's everywhere around us, but it's also infinitely recyclable. So you could, if you talk about circularity, you could aspire to a world where we continuously just recycle the steel that exists. But much like other products, demand is much greater than the availability of steel for recycling. Over 85 to 90% of steel is already being recycled. So it's about how do we create enough virgin steel, over the next 30, 40 years without destroying our planet in order to reach a fully circular steel economy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. And I appreciate what you're saying about generating that demand. When I was researching for this panel, I came across some articles around how Volvo and Mercedes have put out some announcements that they're going to be using green steel, if you will, in their automobiles. So to me, it sounds like, at least if, on the surface, it sounds like there's some demand coming from sort of the consumer product space that's then going to push the steel makers to adopt this more. What do you think?
Definitely, we're seeing a lot of partnerships, especially from the automotive sector, which is a driving force behind this demand for low carbon steel, because they're a very consumer facing, they're consumer facing brands, and their customers are asking them, we want responsibly produced cars. We're seeing the same drive in the built environment as well. There are more and more building companies that are looking to specify, buildings with responsibly produced steel. I think one of the key challenges, and I alluded to it, is right now we can't just produce that type of steel at scale. So it is one of those rare markets where there is likely to be a premium on producing very low carbon steel, but that doesn't solve our problems. Even the most optimistic scenarios, it's still only 1% of steel production globally. So what do we do about the 99 remaining percent, which are still huge emitters of carbon emissions?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Thank you very much, Anne-Claire. I'm really excited to get back to your brain and learn more from the steel side of things. So we will we'll talk to you a little bit later on in the show, if you will. Thank you very much. Our last but not least guest here on our panel is Janice Tran, and she's the Chief Executive Officer at Canaan Energy, and she has an extensive finance background from firms like Generate Capital and that utility NRG. So please welcome Janice to the program. Thank you, Janice, for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. So you offer a solution that's tech agnostic and relatively end market agnostic. So we wanted to ask sort of like, what's the goal of deploying these tried and true technologies at scale? Why did you choose this type of agnostic strategy?
Yeah, and maybe before diving into that, just a quick background on what Canaan Energy is. So we are focused on waste heat to power. So we go to industrial sites like cement and steel. Many people don't know that, when you look at cement, the process of creating that clinker, you have to actually heat those kilns up to about 2,700 degrees Fahrenheit. And in steel, you're heating the steel or using heat to the point of about 1,500 degrees Fahrenheit. So it's a lot of heat that then gets vented into the atmosphere and kind of wasted. And you see that with a lot of other industrial processes like fertilizer, glass, a lot of oil and gas, biomass even. So what we thought is, hey, there's an industry here that can take that heat and then create clean baseload power. And there's technologies that are out there that exist. It's not new technology. It's just that the sector hasn't really caught up with a lot of the other implemented innovations, like you see in, say, solar and wind, and it hasn't been really applied to these industrial decarbonization and industrial efficiency technologies. So we created Canon Energy to really focus on that. Is there's a lot of new inventions that are out there, and that's absolutely necessary. But what about the existing inventions and technologies that, you know, now is the time to start putting them into practice? So we see that with waste heat to power, and to that point about, you know, why did we choose this business model being tech agnostic, not really, you know, inventing something new, or we're deploying kind of existing technologies, is simply because of that. So, you know, prior to starting up Canon, I was at Generate Capital. One of the main theses for Generate Capital is to really deploy technologies that already exist, use financing to kind of bring technologies that are, you know, 2, 5 deployments into like, you know, 50, 100, 500, and to really kind of implement that scaling up and commercialization. And so what I saw at Generate is, you know, there's now more, like, thanks to funds like Generate, kind of an increase of capital that's willing to look at these kind of what I call nascent, unsexy sectors. But we need more kind of companies out there that are willing to build companies to do this. And that was the real bottleneck. That's what we are doing with Canon, is that we're hoping with this company, we can really change policy, get the capital markets ready for industrial efficiency, and then, you know, really just put some steel in the ground and start building these types of projects.
Fantastic, thank you. And so, what are some of those challenges that you're seeing with these waste heat to power projects, getting them off the ground? What are some of your barriers?
Yeah, and it's interesting because waste heat to power, it's base load power. So there's a lot of kind of discussions about solar plus storage, and, you know, about a lot of kind of corporate commitments of trying to not just procure RECs that are solar and wind, which is intermittent. They're trying to match their demand, which might be kind of a more stable curve to clean energy supply. So there's more and more demand for baseload emission-free power, but not as many kind of sources to meet that demand, and especially when we think about grid resiliency and things like that. And so when I think about you know what we're doing, I think it hits on that topic. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much, Janice. All right, so everybody who's attending this event, these are our panelists, and I want to bring everybody back so that we can talk more generally. And also, we want to take your questions as well. So if you have a burning question, please put it in the chat, and we will give you a heads up when we're about to call on you through the chat. So be looking for that. So ladies, you all have these different initiatives to decarbonize this heavy industry. And my question for you is, what is really top of mind for these leaders in the building materials industry? Are they highly motivated to decarbonize? Is it something that we need to push them on? You know, where do we stand now, and what are your predictions for the future? Dinah, you want to start?
Sure.
I saw you nodding your head, so.
Well, I'll speak not for the whole built environment. I'll speak for the industry. I guess top of mind is basically we know that this is the time that our industry is facing that kind of existential juncture, right? The world is starting to realize that this is a hugely important industry. We're important for achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. You know, this product is absolutely crucial, like steel is, for decent housing, infrastructure, roads, sustainable infrastructure. So we need to be around, but we need to have that social license to operate. And, you know, that's why top of mind is getting, quite frankly, these business leaders know that their social license to operate is earned by committing to carbon neutrality and building that into the way that they're doing business. So yeah, I think that everybody in the industry really gets it and is very, very active in starting to address it.
Thank you. How about you, Anne-Claire? What are you seeing from the steel side of things?
Well, it's kind of hard not to echo what Dina just said, but it's a very similar conundrum in the sense that there are a lot of companies and leaders in steelmaking that are making, some pretty bold commitments. And across the globe, we're seeing companies in China making broad sweeping statements that they are going to reach carbon neutrality by 2050. Similarly, in Europe, I think what's on the mind of a lot of the steel manufacturers, and I expect it's the same in cement, is what's going to happen to carbon pricing? Is that going to have an impact on their business model? Is it going to be something that enables them to differentiate if they're following the right paths, as opposed to relying on imported emissions from somewhere else, which obviously is a massive issue. And the second aspect is really around how can they gain the trust of the communities that they work with and their employees. It's a huge value proposition for employees, especially with new generations, to demonstrate that you have a true commitment to sustainability. So, it's not a sexy sector to be in, but it is about how can you ensure that you get the best talents and the best minds that are going to, try and achieve what we need to achieve to survive, literally.
I would like to add to that in terms of, what's on top of mind for industry. If you really look at what's happening across the globe for sustainability, what's impacting sustainability, first of all, we have greater population, greater demand for housing and for building. And one of the best ways to be more sustainable is to live in more dense urban centers. And so to do that, you need to build up, and that includes products like concrete and steel. And what's most critical is that these buildings are created to be resilient to the environment. As climate shifts and there are climate events that require protection to keep people safe, these building products have to be made with quality. They have to be made to withstand the elements. And so that balance of how do we meet the demand, how do we continue to provide the quality that's necessary to be resilient, and how do we decarbonize? It's difficult because in other industries, you can have what might be referred to as radical or disruptive change, but in heavy industry, we have to ensure quality is met first and foremost. You cannot afford to be too radical or too disruptive at the expense of the building structure.
Absolutely, and at the expense of the people who might be in that building, right? Okay, fantastic. Janice, do you have anything you'd like to share?
Yeah, maybe the last thing to add to that is when we think about energy transition and transitioning to this decarbonized economy, what's top of mind is just different within the organizations themselves. And so we deal with a lot of the largest industrials, and so a lot of the concepts that we're talking about here speak to the senior executive level. They see the demand from society, they see the demand from policy, from their stakeholders, the shareholders. But when we go through our business development process, we're trying to convince all throughout that level of the organization to explore these decarbonization kind of projects. And so when you're speaking to kind of lower level management, the facility person, what's speaking to them about policy and things like that, they care about, well, how does this actually impact my job? Am I going to get fired? Like, how does this impact my literal my kind of my kingdom? And what risk do I bear rather than the opportunity that this creates? So it's an interesting, when we think about the energy transition, we have to think about how that is communicated throughout the entire chain of decision making. We need lots of people to not say no in order to get the yes.
Absolutely. Thank you, Janice. We have a question from the audience, so I would like to call on her now. I believe, Jana, who do we want to call on first?
Sure. So we have two great questions from Joy Montgomery, and I think she's happy to share with the group. So Joy, you can take it away.
Thank you. Yeah, my first question was about the constraints for permeable concrete in hardscapes, roads, and highways, and I know weight is an issue for that. And my second question is the constraints for basalt or glass rebar.
Okay, very, very detailed question. Thank you, Joy. And any of you like to jump on that?
I can address that, especially on the permeable concrete. So just to provide a definition for those who may not be familiar, the concept of permeable concrete is one of the sustainable solutions where, ultimately in order to allow for water, for example, to get through the concrete to the soil beneath it, you can create sort of some permeability. So some gaps for that water to get in there. And so, it's kind of like one example of different kinds of concrete applications that that provide a sustainable solution to an existing environmental problem. In terms of the specific technology and solutions that I'm a part of, it's certainly something that is applicable to permeable concrete. And like all kinds of applications, there can be different considerations for, ultimately what do we need this concrete or this building product to achieve? What does it have to function to do? And from that that perspective, you're then thinking, okay, now what can I do to reduce that carbon impact? So this is one example where there are many solutions that can be done while maintaining the permeability. Adding CO2 is certainly one of those solutions, and any kind of building owner or infrastructure developer would be thinking of that kind of perspective as they're implementing sustainable solutions.
Thank you very much, Christy.
I wanted to
Claire
just
Ann.
add to that, is just to build on that and to say, that's a really great example of something that comes up time and again. And it's the fact that, Christy, you mentioned it, it's people, designers, architects have to choose the right sort of product for their needs. And right now, environmental issues are not necessarily the ones that are first thought of. So it's not just a question of the processes or the emissions, or it's the fact that we have humans behaving in ways where they're not selecting the right product for the job or the most environmentally sensible solution, along with safety issues and other issues of concern.
Thank you. And Claire, I saw you nodding your head there. Do you have anything else you'd like to share, or we're happy to move
No,
on?
I'm not going to delve too much on rebar because it's a complicated topic, and I'm sure there's a lot of people that would probably fall asleep if I talked about it for too long. But there is technology out there, and it has made high-grade quality steel that can be used with low carbon. The challenge, as I said previously, is scale. It's just scaling up right now hasn't been necessarily done with proven technology. So you can do small volumes, but larger volumes are still proving quite challenging. Although there are a number of pilot projects that are going to be started, including some in Canada in the next 3 years. I won't name names yet because I might get in trouble. But there are some projects coming up which are very promising.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you. Let's move on to our next question. Jana, what do we have for our next questioner?
Yes, we have a lot of great questions. So our next question can come from Amanda Lucetti. Hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. You have the stage to ask to everyone.
Hi, it's Lucetti. You're close. So my question, centers around, speaking of humans not choosing the right solution, it's around procurement. I actually had heard the Carbon Care CEO talk about procurement on a podcast last year, and got my, I would say, wheels spinning around that and like the keys that the procurement team holds at these different companies. And so my question's about the successes. What successes have you seen with persuading procurement to invest in decarbonizing products and technologies? And then what hurdles do you still see?
Well, maybe I'll start, since you, I guess it sounds like you saw a podcast with Rob Niven, our CEO, talking about it. This is a really, really important topic if we want to talk about decarbonizing heavy industry. I don't know what the status for steel specifically, but when it comes to concrete, governments procure about 40% of the concrete. And so this means it's really important for government to step up. There's a lot of policy that can address carbon capture or might be addressing general climate goals. But oftentimes what we're seeing right now is a lag when it comes to actual procurement. The procurement of concrete specifically from a lot of governments is pretty behind the times. It's quite what we would call prescriptive. It dictates how the concrete needs to be made without allowing for innovation, which can involve quality innovation, sustainable innovation to come into play. And so it's really critical that governments address the procurement side of making sure the procurement strategies align with policy action and policy strategies. And we're seeing some of that emerge. If you want to look in the States, Buy Clean is a really popular example. There's a bill called LECLA out of New York State, which actually just passed Assembly yesterday. So that was kind of exciting. We saw a similar bill happening in Colorado just yesterday as well. And so we're seeing some action and momentum happening, but it needs to happen a lot faster than it is if governments want to have any chance of meeting the climate objectives that have been declared by many municipalities and countries and states and provinces around the globe.
Mm-hmm. Oh, thank you, Christy. Any of you other speakers want to weigh in on that?
Yeah, I'll chip in and build on what Christy just said, because it is for steel very similar to cement. You know, public procurement, because of the whole infrastructure story, is a massive buyer of steel. And we're doing currently a lot of work in terms of, you know, around COP26 and things like that, around how can we use, you know, responsible standards like responsible steel or others to encourage government procurement to make those one of the criteria in their choice. We're still seeing too many procurement decisions being made purely on quality and price, and not many ESG metrics within their decision-making frameworks. So apart from, you know, Buy Clean, which everyone talks about, and it's great, we need to see much more initiative like that across, you know, government purchasing.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
And maybe just to add to that too, outside of government purchasing, it's also corporate purchasing, which is what we deal with a lot. Is it goes back to my first point of, you know, change happens across multiple levels within an organization, and the procurement group has a lot of influence on that, and people don't typically know that. So when a lot of leaders corporate leaders are making these, you know, 2050 targets, making sure that trickles down into metrics, and, you know, the procurement people get the memo is actually really important. Yeah.
I think it's not just getting the memo, it's also having KPIs that are aligned with sustainability objectives. And I've seen that in some of the companies that I've worked with, where, you know, those KPIs, those metrics, we're so happy that CEOs have these great metrics where that, you know, compensation is tied to ESG performance. It's actually much more effective when your purchasing guy has KPIs that are linked to sustainability, because it does affect real change.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, thank you. Gina, how about our next question?
Sure. So our next question can come from Sam Miyamoto. Again, hope I'm pronouncing that correctly.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks. Hi, everyone. Thanks for this panel. I guess, Anne-Claire, to kind of piggyback on the concept of ESG. I'm new to ESG, and I'm kind of curious, but I've noticed that there are a bunch of different frameworks out there. So my question is, what kind of ESG reporting standards or frameworks are appropriate for these sectors? I've heard that a recent webinar said that SASB was like an on-ramp for, you know, reporting. So I was curious.
I was kind of hoping no one would ask me that question, because it's a really complicated one to answer, and I could create a lot of enemies depending on the answer that I give. I think, yeah, I use the all-encompassing term ESG because it's become very trendy and fashionable, and everyone understands it in different ways. The way in which I use it is that it's about, you know, common sets of metrics around sustainability issues beyond just carbon. Carbon is just one aspect of sustainability, and I touched upon, you know, human rights, labor rights. I think that's one of the problems we have, is there are multiple standards. There's often a confusion between what disclosure is versus actual performance. So currently we're still in a mindset where transparency and disclosure is rewarded by the markets, rewarded by the finance sector. You know, giving information is viewed as great. Whereas I'm more on the side of, it's not about how much information you share and how transparent you are. It's whether the information you give is actually accurate and you can trust that information, and can it actually be actioned upon. So I'm not going to criticize any of the existing frameworks that you've mentioned, because that would probably not be necessarily very productive. But I think it is exactly the conversation that we're all having, including certification mechanisms, which aren't perfect either. It's about how do we have actually less reporting requirements and more focus on actually actionable, you know, performance metrics.
Mm-hmm.
Can I just, I'd like to add something, if I might, just on this issue of ESG. And Claire, I love the way that you phrase that. And, you know, I've been in environmental and social sustainability. I don't really care, as long as I'm playing somewhere in sustainability. And I come to this industry and look, I mean, this is the women in clean tech. And I just wanted to flag that, as one of my previous bosses said, you have to change who to change how. And so I just wanted to note in passing that the staffing numbers of our industry, and this is not with my GCCA hat on, but come on guys, it's about 15% women. And this is, we've got to do something about it. And the way to do something about it is to make it a much more attractive industry. It's never going to be sexy, but it will be more attractive if we're doing the right things for environmental and social and governance reasons.
Thank you, Dinah. Janice, Christie, anything else to add?
Well, I do agree with that. I was just sharing a story with the panel prior to this panel starting, how I was on a panel just last week with the World Cement Association and Women in Clean Tech, and it was about how do we attract more women into the concrete industry, and part of that is by having decarbonization goals and bringing different viewpoints, diversity into the industry by through mission alignment. Getting specifically to address that question about ESG reporting, one thing I'll state is that you can't manage what you can't measure. So whatever program we're using, the key is understanding the baseline data that is going into that program. When it comes to building products, one of the best ways to do that is to request something called an environmental product declaration, an EPD. Dinah mentioned it earlier, and it's basically like a nutrition label for a building product that states, here are the environmental impacts of this product. So if you start by collecting that information, you now have data that you can measure and use to make informed decisions that can then fit into any kind of ESG program or outline that you might have.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And actually it's a perfect lead into our next question from Amy Lewis, I believe. Gina?
Yes, yep, Amy's the next one, and Amy, you can share with the group.
Great, thanks. Yeah, I will read as I put it in the chat. I said, this is a broad question, but it's something I've been asked in my work, which has to do with Cal Green standards. So it's mandatory green building code compliance. How can we estimate greenhouse gas emissions reductions attainable through mandatory green building code requirements? So it's right. It seems like a hard number to wrangle because there's a lot of variables going into it, but it's still an important one. And when we're able to even give sort of maybe some rough numbers, it can be compelling to decision makers. Thanks.
Thank you, Amy.
I'm going to recommend you start by going to buildingtransparency.org. So this is a tool called the EC3 tool, Embodied Carbon and Construction Calculator, that was founded by one of the most badass women in the industry that I know, Stacy Smedley. This is an open tool calculator that basically collects all the information that comes from environmental product declarations, so the raw data, the EPDs, that have been published, and creates sort of this ability to compare and contrast. So what it allows is you can create a baseline for certain regions to understand, how much carbon should concrete produce in my region, and what's the variability, and what does low carbon mean, what does high carbon mean, and it allows for decision making in that process. So that's how we start. It's through collecting the data. You have to start with the data and then sharing the data so that we can, compare and contrast, and then create those baselines for what makes sense for given building products, given materials, given regions, given applications, whatever the case might be.
That's a fantastic lead. It also just leads me for a plug well, not a plug actually, but just an observation about concrete, which is that through the lifetime of the product, it undergoes something called recarbonation, where it starts to take back in carbon, CO2. And that leads, it's just like jungles, right? Cities can actually be sinks for carbon. And that's something to include and to try to measure.
Thank you, ladies. Either anybody else want to join in on that answer?
No, I'll just say if you're really interested in that story on steel, World Steel has a lot of information on life cycle assessments and EPDs, which is quite enlightening if you're a neophyte.
Thank you. Gina, any other questions?
Yes, we've got a couple more questions. We have one from Susan Dorward, and she'd like to ask it to the group.
Hi, my name is Sue, and I am working on a LECLA bill in New Jersey. So I was happy to see the New York LECLA bill pass yesterday. But one of the things that we've encountered and that they encountered in New York is pushback from environmental organizations who are concerned about increased pollutants from using waste materials like municipal solid waste or tires, and tying that to environmental justice concerns. So, you know, reducing CO2 emissions at the expense of pollution and local communities. And I was wondering if you could address that.
I'm quite familiar with it. I do think some of those concerns were misinformed. It was actually kind of disappointing to see the opposition from environmental groups of what was, in my opinion, one of the most progressive sustainability type of procurement bills that were being put in place. And the hard part is that, you know, at the end of the day, I think we all want the same thing. We want decarbonization. We want zero waste. We want human rights. And the hard part is, how do you really get there? And you need to have a balance between a pragmatic approach that is something that's capable. So if you're, you know, building products, you have to make sure quality is maintained. That's a non-starter to any kind of conversation. So how do you do that while also pushing the envelope? And policy has to be that strike that balance. And so I think it's not an easy question to address, but ultimately I would really encourage sustainability groups to, you know, find ways to really push industry, encourage industry to head in that right direction, while being conscious of what is really necessary to industry to still meet the demands that are required today.
Thank you. Any of the other guests want to weigh in on that, or we have two more questions?
I'll give 1 second, if I may, just because it builds on this question and the previous one as well. One of the things we've done at Responsible Steel, and other standards out there are doing the same, is to make them multi-stakeholder. So the way our standard is designed and how it's been voted on by our membership is that civil society organizations have voted into this as much as business membership. So hopefully the solutions and the standards and the performance expected, I'm not going to say has the buy-in of all of civil society, because it's a broad space. It's like saying all of business bought into this, but at least it's a dialogue process where the two sides have, and I hate viewing them as sides, but sadly that's how it works sometimes, have come to a consensus together on what they view as acceptable good performance. And that helps to a certain degree. And that makes it different to other reporting standards, which are, you know, purely industry led.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. Gina, I think we have time just for one more question. We have 5 minutes left.
Okay, we have one question from Anne Hendry. If she's able to.
There she is.
Okay, here we go. Yeah, I was just wondering what's being done with mitigating the effects of concrete and paved roads that create heat islands in mostly residential areas would be the biggest problem. But did you hear any of that?
Yeah, we heard you.
Oh, good. Okay.
Heat
so
islands.
I said unmute myself. Okay. So that's basically my question. As we're going through and developing new materials or trying to deal with the materials that we're using now, what new ways of creating those materials are there to mitigate the damage that they do to begin with?
All right. Thank you very much. Dinah, do you want to start with that one?
Yeah, I will say that just on the basis of the Global Cement and Concrete Association, I'm sort of not the best person to answer that because it's more of a built environment issue. It raises just, again, I would stress, Anne, that I'm sure, first of all, we have a research network associated with the GCCA that is, I am sure, tackling similar projects and problems like that. However, again, I just want to sort of reemphasize how important it is to bring up the fact that there are different types of materials for different solutions, and sometimes with the best will in the world, because of procurement criteria being too stringent or old-fashioned, some of those solutions don't get the chance to come out into the fresh air. So if you're asking for a municipal government, it might be best to ask them this excellent question.
Okay. The best strategies is just planting some trees and putting out some natural landscaping as well to help mitigate that. And so that's where it has to be part of a bigger picture that often is happening at the, the municipal type of level.
It does. You're right. I agree. It needs to be integrated with whole, city planning and everything too, because really the reason most places are paved is because of automobiles. So if we reduce the use of individual use automobiles, then that will contribute as well. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you very much, Anne. Before we wrap up, I personally have a final question for our panel, and it is around sort of what do we do as individuals? People on this call, we have smaller spheres of influence than those of you on our panel, but we do have influence. And there are things that we can do to support you in this broader mission of decarbonizing these materials. So I'm curious to know, what would be your one piece of advice, a takeaway for someone on this call, that something that they can do to support these initiatives?
Well, I'll start. I'll say something that's a little bit different than I would normally say, which is, consider joining the industry. Concrete is a cool product. I didn't set out my career to become part of the concrete industry. When I first joined my company, I didn't know what the difference was between cement and concrete. And now I have conversations every single day with engineers about how to build with cement and concrete. And I think there's a lot more than what meets the eye. And so we need more people in the industry who come from that sustainability mission as the key driver that can come into the industry and help this industry to reach those goals. So I'd encourage you to literally join.
Absolutely, thank you. And Dinah, I know you have a hard stop, so do you have anything to share before you go?
I absolutely, I love that idea, Christy. I was going to say the same thing. So we're in violent agreement yet again. But I would also say, look, just phone up your politicians, phone up your local governments, ask them what they're doing in terms of their procurement criteria, and they will listen to you.
Mm-hmm. It's true. Thank you very much. Anne Claire, Janice, anything to share?
Yeah, I would just echo what has been said here. It's actually a very exciting industry. It's very nascent. So, this is the industry that doesn't have ready solutions for decarbonization. There's a lot of ideas out there, but we need more entrepreneurs and more kind of people coming in and building the sector to make it a reality. So I'd say, if you're looking for a career change or looking for a place with more impact than where you currently are, really, reach out to me. I'm happy to give a rundown on all the different careers in this, but consider joining.
Thank you. And Claire, any parting words? What's some news?
Yeah, I think, heavy industry is sexier than it seems. It's actually really interesting. It's really challenging. And I think it's, if we don't get this right, then we're doomed. We could get it right on everything else. If we can't stop, hard to abate sectors, then we might as well just all curl up under a rock. So creative minds, people who it's not because you don't come from the sector that you can't make a change in it. So yeah, just get involved as much as you can.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. Thank you. Well, everybody, thank you very much for joining us today. This has been a fantastic session, very informational, wonderful questions from our community, and some very smart people out there in the world. I appreciate all of those questions. Thank you for asking them. And I also want to thank Dina Pallier for manning the chat, and also Alyssa Harrell for doing the slides, and our other volunteers for this event. And if we go back to the slides really briefly, we will remind you of our upcoming events, which is one's an ESG panel. There's a sustainable fashion panel coming up, some other really cool stuff. And also, if you have ideas for events that you want us to hold, let us know. We're here to serve you. And so we would love to get that feedback from you as to the type of events you want to see here at WCS. Next slide, please. You can join us on social media. We are very active in the virtual world because, well, frankly, we've been forced to be in the past year, but hopefully that's going to be, we're going to be out and about in person again, but we won't stop being active on virtual. So please join us. And also, we post a lot of events on YouTube, so please go there and watch our past events. And we thank you very much for joining us today. And we hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you very much.